Welcome back to Talk of the Town. Joining me now on the phone is Mr. Carl Asikainen. He is the Youth Systems Coordinator for the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. And once again, the organization has released their annual study looking at homelessness here in the state of Connecticut based on, I believe, maybe you can correct me, Mr. Asikainen, a point in time. Is that what it's referred to?
Yes.
Yes. The point in time survey taking a look at homelessness here in Connecticut. And this, we must tell you, was done prior to all of the lockdowns and the pandemic and all of the other things that have happened over the last year. This was done last January, correct?
Yes, it is. Yes, it was. Exactly.
So you, as the Youth Systems Coordinator, are focused mainly on the youth homelessness here in the state of Connecticut. And tell us a little bit about where we stand or where we stood at this point last year.
So, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. We have been doing, from the coalition, we've been doing the annual youth count survey that follows the point in time count. The point in time count is a one-night measure of how many folks we have outside and or in shelter, so unsheltered or sheltered folks statewide, and that's actually a national effort, and it's happening again this year on January 26th. But last year, after the point-in-time count, we also did a week-long survey for young people, and that is the ages 13 through 24 years old. So quite an expanse that includes both, secondary schools and places where young folks might be, as well as that transitioning adult youth age range of 18 to 24. We've been doing this for a few years, but last year in January, right, we conducted this count. We did 2,500 surveys with about 250 volunteers statewide, trying to be as kind of geographically comprehensive as possible, including many points in Waterbury and in Northwest Connecticut, to get a sense about and asking young people about their experiences with housing instability and or homelessness, to get a sense about what are we talking about when we say we're addressing minor homelessness or we're addressing homelessness in general for young people. Like how do we know we are, and what is the universe of young people experiencing housing instability or homelessness? We're just trying to, as a statewide agency, get a look at that. Like what is it specifically?
Well, and I imagine then, obviously you're looking at trends, you're looking at comparisons to previous years with this information to see, are we doing a better job? Is the problem getting worse, getting better? So just briefly, the trend line here, is it down? Is it up?
Well, yeah, it's hard to tell, actually. So that's a great question. And it's challenging to tell for young people, right? Because we have, number one, methodologically, year to year, it's really difficult to count or to survey this population because we're talking about 13 to 24-year-olds. They're within schools and recreation centers and youth service bureaus. They're in between the Department of Corrections often and Department of Children and Families and Family Welfare. They are maybe out of school and are trying to do some post-secondary work or entering the labor market. They may not know a lot about mainstream resources, so they might remain hidden for a lot of reasons. And young people also, we know, particularly minors, might not want to report that they're being challenged with housing or homelessness because of the effects that could have on their family or any kind of support that they might have around housing. So they might be worried about outing themselves, outing their parents, or caregivers or providers in some other way. So we know that this is a challenging population for some of the reasons and beyond that I just listed. So year to year, though, I think was like what you were trying to get to. Last year, or the year before, 2019, COVID has messed everything up here. So I think it's 2019 we're talking about. We did an awful lot more surveys We surveyed more broadly geographically. 2020 was a real focus. We did fewer surveys, but we really focused on areas where we knew that there were higher instances of young people experiencing homelessness because of social demographic issues. So again, we focused on towns like New Britain and Bridgeport and New Haven and Waterbury and Wyndham, et cetera. So methodologically, year to year, it's challenging for us to say, is this increasing, is this decreasing? What I would call attention to our listeners about this fact is that we know that there is a problem here, and it's been reported by our partners at the state level, from the State Department of Education, from the Department of Corrections, from the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and from our runaway homeless youth providers that are statewide. And part of the challenge, frankly, is to use our survey, the extrapolated data that we have about what we think is happening with homeless rates and unstable housing rates in the state, and combine them with our state partners who are doing this incredible, intensive, and really vital work, again, with like crossing over with populations of folks that we may have outreach to or are trying to gain data on. So in short, big part of the problem is, or a big part of the issue is really connecting all of the folks who are concerned about these populations and their struggles with housing, and making sure that we're all communicating together regionally and statewide in a comprehensive way. So that's like what the coalition is trying to keep our eye on that prize, and that's the main focus.
Now, when we talk about youth homelessness, are we talking about kids who are on their own and homeless, or does this also include kids who are homeless as a part of a family unit that is experiencing this housing insecurity or homelessness?
Perfect. So great. Yeah, we're talking about both. Exactly. So unaccompanied homeless youth, UHY, is what you are talking about when you're talking about minors who might be apart from their family. So someone who's 17 or 16 or 15, outside, couch surfing, in a car, et cetera, still trying to attend school. That's a particular part of that population. And then also, of course, we want to make sure that we're hand in hand with our family, community service, and housing providers to make sure that families who are experiencing homelessness can maintain their connections to schools and maintain also as well and establish a connection to the coordinated access network. And I will say, frankly, Waterbury, like you all in that area you have some really strong partners at the school district level, and districts are struggling with remote learning and with identification of students in general and with logging in of students in general, but you have just some fantastic staff at the town level that are addressing homeless youth. I mean, there's 18,000, and I was just looking at the SDE, the State Department of Education website, like there's 18,000 students in Waterbury in the school district. It's a really big school district. And you need some staff, right, to pay attention to those students. And I just want to say, like, there's fantastic both backbone organization level support from the community foundation, the Connecticut Community Foundation, the United Way, and then also from, and that's not an exhaustive list, I'm sorry, but then also from the Waterbury School District and Shinia Paris, and the McKinney-Vento, who's really proactive and outreaching and making sure that families, as soon as they're struggling with housing, are kind of identified and given this kind of suite of services that the school district can offer.
It's got to be extremely difficult when you're dealing with homeless and youth, specifically, especially when it comes to the school system. How many of them do you think, what maybe on a percentage level or just maybe raw numbers, just basically drop out of the entire system? In other words, if they are homeless, then they stop going to school. And then, of course, during this period of time with the pandemic, it's even more difficult for them, I'm sure, trying to find some place to stay as we're all trying to stay socially distanced. I know a lot of charities have been struggling throughout the year in offering services because they can only have to limit the number of people they're allowing into their facilities. So what sort of experience do you think that some of these youth are going through, not just last January before all of this thing got rolling, but even now with these additional pressures?
Yeah, right. You're spot on there. That's really good. Like, what we don't know is what we don't know, and which people say all the time, but it's acutely true right now. Like, the folks, the young people, and the families who aren't in communication with the school district are the ones that should concern us the most. And do we know how many of those folks there are at any moment? This is a continual question and challenge statewide. It's one of the challenges for every single school district. And I will just say, and this is statewide, as of last year when COVID interrupted the school year and made everybody go remote for the end, we lost contact as a state with almost a third of our students.
Wow.
And then the beginning of the school year this year was not any rosier than that, right? Like, we were basing our numbers of homeless students on who we had contact with in the spring and in the early summer. And again, those were limited because of COVID. So part of the challenge is, like, we need to really inform and catalyze this whole network of service providers and people who are concerned about young people to make sure that both families and unaccompanied young people know about the resources that schools have and the efforts that schools are making, like mobile hotspots and technology to go and maybe tutoring that is offered. Like, we want to make sure that everyone, regardless of their housing situation, is aware of the scope of services that are available through the district. And it varies district to district, but like I said, Waterbury is fantastic, but we're always worried, and it's a really good question. We're always worried about who we don't know or who we can't kind of identify through school districts. And it goes as well, if you just go farther and look at populations of homeless folks, we're worried about this as well from an outreach perspective in general for the state, right? Like, how do we know how many people are outside or who are marginally housed? This is a question of identification, of coordination, of outreach, and also asking local partners to be more involved. Like, for instance, through a municipal campaign that we're launching at CCEH with Sustainable Connecticut and the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities to get folks and frankly allies that have been involved, but to get allies from the municipal level more involved formally with this effort to identify, refer to services, and get stably housed any person, either a minor or a family or a young person by themselves who's over 18.
You used an interesting word there. You're talking about identifying these youth, and as someone who just a citizen of the state of Connecticut. I mean, it's you look around and you see kids walking the sidewalk, and you just think, hey, well, they're out there going to wherever and just hanging with their friends. But how would you maybe identify or even maybe begin to suspect that somebody might be suffering from homelessness and experiencing this situation?
So again, like, a lot of this is we need to raise awareness at the school district level. We need to create opportunities for peer-to-peer communication for young people. It's something that's lacking statewide. So that a young person within, say, a secondary school environment, an important step for anyone to take who's struggling with housing is to identify, or particularly a student, right, is to identify a trusted adult. So it's like, who is it that you can trust with it that's in the school level? Technically, it's the McKinney-Vento liaison who's supposed to address homeless students and families and level that terrain. But we also know that we need to make some efforts to make peer-to-peer communication and peer-to-peer, frankly, leadership stronger for young people to have some trusted other young people that they go to should they be struggling. And like I said at the outset, like, there's a real impetus for young people to maybe keep this anonymous right? Because there's shame involved, and there's like stigma involved, of course, with calling out your housing status or asking for help. So it's not easy to ask for help, particularly if you have never had to, but it's not easy for anyone. So I know that we just need to create better pathways for young people to feel safe about communicating, both to adults within the school district or within their community at youth service bureaus, with a trained person at the library, which we know libraries have been. And, COVID has complicated that, but libraries are also these important, like, community referral to service spaces. And then, also within schools, and like, who can you trust within your school district? Is it the McKinney-Vento? Is it a teacher that you have? Is it a counselor? Is it the school lunch person? Like, we need young people to be able to communicate like kind of more openly and broadly, and make sure that they have safe kind of alternatives or pathways for them to articulate what they're experiencing with housing.
You mentioned early on that, part of this housing insecurity is, kids maybe couch surfing, sleeping at a friend's house for a couple of nights here and there. If someone is in that situation, I would guess it'd be very difficult to sort of make the leap from maybe they just need a break from their own home environment for a couple of days, as to this young person is now very likely potentially going to become homeless. It's not something that I think a lot of people would make that jump to, but it's something that we really need to, I think, kind of at least entertain. If you do have someone maybe just sleeping on your couch for a couple of days, what is the next step for this person, right?
Exactly. So doubled up, we know that this is happening all over, and it's not just with students, but it particularly is with families, but people are doubling up all over at this particular moment. What we're worried about for any level of population, but definitely for young people, is how safe is this setting, and how long is this setting safe? Or are there any do you have to do anything to remain in this setting? Are there any demands on you to remain there? So we try to get down to the level of, okay, there might be some housing instability due to family conflict at this moment. This person might be couch surfing. It's hard to know about how all of these movements happen like day to day, but the question should be really focused on safety of the young person, alternatives for the young person, what has been happening at home that makes them leave. Can we help this with family mediation conflict? Can we engage the family who is maybe imminently homeless themselves with some rapid rehousing or some flexible funding to keep them housed in their space? Like, we need to know the size of the universe at any moment as best that we can through all of our partners that we have. And there are many active partners in Waterbury. But we need to know, beyond that, into rural areas and into municipalities, like what is this universe like, and how can we best refer them quickly so that their instances of housing are they're rare, brief, and they're not recurring, right? Emergencies happen all over, and crises happen all over every single day. So we want to be mindful of that, and we want to create this system that's as responsive as possible.
Now, why this point in time count that we did back in January is great, and it sounds like it's very helpful when it comes to kind of streamlining or refining the services that we need. But overall, through this past year, have you seen additional stresses that have been put upon families and individuals and youth and the young people that have increased or caused more of a pressure on the system? Because as I said earlier, one of the problems is while we have so many services that are out there trying to help, the pandemic has put amazing pressure on them for, people can't be at work and all these other things that we mentioned earlier. But then on the other side of the coin, the need for those services, I would assume, has got to have increased with the, everybody being locked down at home, and the depression and alcohol and drug abuse and violence and all kinds of things that we've seen on the uptick through the past year because of the lockdowns and because of the stress. So it seemed to be caught in kind of a catch-22 here.
Yes. Yeah, we are. I mean, we could see this last year when at the end of the school year, when we were paying attention to young people and working with the State Department of Education, we just knew that those initial numbers of students were alarming that had not connected with the school from sometime in April to, May 16th, right? Like there was just an astounding number of folks, like almost a third, like I said at the outset, of the student population. And this is SDE numbers, right? So I think we've been challenged by that number in the spring, and I think there's been a moratorium as well on evictions. Many people have been able to stay housed, and that continues. But we know that we still are missing contact with a lot of our young people in the state. And this, it goes backwards also. And I just want to put this into context, for young people too. So we should have more young people enrolling with pre-K right now statewide. We should have more younger people. We know that those numbers are far down because of COVID. We know that the homeless numbers, actually, talking to SDE for this year, they seem like they're actually down statewide, and that is just a reporting issue. I really strongly do believe, and if you talk to folks from SDE, I think they would say the same thing. So the push here is to really make sure that our networks and our support for the school districts are as strong as possible for minors, and that we are also paying attention to, coordinated access, the speed of appointments that are happening for 18 to 24-year-olds within any part of the state, but the kind of reference and referral to rapid exit funding to keep people housed, flexible funding otherwise to keep a family, which would certainly include students or young people kind of linked up with their housing. And I would just say too, there's a lot of work here for us who are thinking about this system level work to partner with our food partners. Frankly, school districts offer mobile, and I'm sure Waterbury is doing this. I don't know about the details, but school districts are offering feeding sites mobily for families all over. We are working at the coalition with the Connecticut Food Bank and Food Share and Hunger Connecticut as recently as this morning to try to figure out how can we message to families who are waiting in food lines throughout the state, who might be struggling with housing and whose kids are disconnected from the school district for one reason or another, to make sure that they know about their rights and that they know that the community is concerned about young people being connected, and frankly, the kind of overall housing health of the family.
One of the things that I've talked about for a long time here, since the beginning of this whole pandemic, is how it's, with all the changes that we've seen, with so many people working remotely, working from home, so many different ways of getting things done, restaurants having to change their model as far as, offering takeout where maybe they didn't do so much in the past. And I've it's been great to see the creativity. It's been great to see so many people kind of step up and figure out how to navigate in these very difficult times and still hopefully be successful, maintain their jobs, and keep their work going. Your organization, the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, I imagine, it's not just looking at these numbers and saying, okay, let's bring these different organizations together. I imagine you've also had to sort of learn some new tricks in how you do what you do. And are there any that you'd wish to share with us, and maybe things that might be helpful even after we finish up with this, hopefully, fingers crossed, pandemic, and take those lessons forward?
Yeah, so I'll say one thing that has really changed, and that's a great observation that you just made. One thing that has really changed with COVID is that we struggled before with and we continue to struggle, certainly. Like, we need to advertise 211 as the front door to this system of services to address homelessness. What has happened with COVID is that we've been able to, or we had to actually make this connection to 211 and the steps that result from that call more remote friendly. And what that addresses is maybe not so much folks in Waterbury proper, but once you step out of Waterbury, it gets rural really quickly. And the rest of that whole Northwest area that is one coordinated access network, we really struggled with points where people could access services. So I would say one thing that's changed with COVID that's been positive that we will continue is this remote appointment and virtual appointment with 211, be it with a phone call or online otherwise, but typically through a phone call, including releases of information and, all of the points that go into that first 211 conversation, which includes diversion, how can we help you? What are your strengths that you have now? What resources might you need in the short term, in the long term? What's like the best path given the regional resources for you that we can offer? I would say that has really changed, and that's particularly for the Northwest. I happen to live in the northeast corner of the state in this beautiful town called Eastford, and we're rural. We're just like the Northwest corner. I think you got maybe some more hills and horses. But we're really the same, and we struggle with these same things where remote towns, if someone was experiencing homelessness in Washington and in Kent and towns that aren't that far from you all, but might seem really far, like that has been a fantastic change. So remote appointments has been a sea change. And just to put an exclamation on this, like before all of the appointments that were made to 211, there was, maybe a third of them, and I might be a tiny bit off with that, but maybe a third of them were actually attended. And the attendance rates are up in like the 70s and 80% numbers right now. So we know that this has been a profound difference. And so we want to continue with that. And we're definitely going to. It's made us like push things. We had this technology before, but we didn't implement it on a broad scale before. So that's definitely been one change. And I'm just trying to think as well, our state level partners, we're really pushing for all of us to be kind of congregating and working together more so, particularly for minors. There's working groups that are dedicated to this now that include the Department of Housing, right, and the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services and the Department of Public Health to really address how is it that we can identify and service up minors who might be unaccompanied, per our conversation here earlier, and or those who might be with families. Like, how can we do this the best? And I would just say there's not a system, really clean nationwide. Washington State has some great stuff that's kind of legislated statewide, but there's not a lot of shining examples about how to address minors who might be unaccompanied comprehensively. So we're really working towards that, and we're concerned about that population.
Well, one of the things that I've picked up on, and again, it's just something that I've sort of noticed over the last number of months, is a lot of the other issues that we used to talk about, especially here on the show, the things like opioid addiction, homelessness, many of these other societal problems that we were really focusing on quite strongly, especially the opioid crisis, seem to have just sort of slipped completely out of the radar for a lot of people with this laser-like focus on the COVID and the pandemic and the impact it's having. But that doesn't mean those problems have gone away. there's still people who are suffering through drug addiction. There's still people who are suffering with homelessness and housing instability. There's still people who are suffering with mental illness. And it just because we're not talking about it as much as we used to, it doesn't mean that problem has ended. And I'm glad I've had the opportunity to speak with you about this, because I think we need to remember, while that problem, like I said, has not gone away, it very likely has gotten even worse because of the pandemic. And that's therefore these types of services and this sort of effort on the behalf of the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness and your partners, and there's so many of them here that I don't even want to start listing them, but that are working with you on this, it's got to be just a much more challenging problem that you're dealing with right now.
Spot on. So opioid addiction, like we know that, or just drug addiction in general, we know that people are suffering quietly with this, and that was the case before COVID, and it's absolutely the case after COVID. There's been a lot of work to increase telehealth options. But my goodness, if you are homeless or you're struggling with just housing, then to be able to connect remotely with an addiction counselor is also just another leap. So you're absolutely right. Like, we don't want to lose focus on some of these fundamental things. I think that there's still lots of opportunity to increase outreach and identification and the strength of the network of providers that we have, not only with the coalition, but that are addressing these different social issues, but with lots of crossover, right? Like reentry counselor, reentry folks who are worried in Waterbury about inmates who are coming out, the school district who's worried about families that might be in shelter and not report it for some time. And you're right, exactly, folks who might be addicted and unable to access treatment for one reason or another. I think if you look at the numbers, it's actually gotten worse, we think, for substance abuse, given that it is a pandemic and a lot of people are very anxious and or depressed about this. So those numbers are, frankly, if you're paying attention, those numbers are not going down. It just might be a recording issue or otherwise, why is it that we don't know? Or why are so many people not coming forward? We need to make really certain in our communities that we're really clear on all fronts around these social issues and supports that folks should have. So it's like network strength. How strong is our network of provision of services, and how loud are we with outreach and just making sure that awareness is at a particular level, and then from there adjust the system to adapt. But Waterbury is fantastic. You have some great backbone nonprofits doing support work there, and the district, the education district is outrageous. They do fantastic work, but it's a question of linking everybody up and making sure that there's communication like across networks.
Well, Mr. Asikainen, I can't thank you enough for your time and for the efforts that you and your organization are putting in here. I know this is an extremely difficult problem, and it's something that's going to be with us for, unfortunately, seems quite a while. So people can go to CCEH.org and find and download the full report on the youth count dashboards and see all of this information. But, sir, thank you again very much for your time and for your efforts.
I want to thank you. Thanks for the time today. We appreciate it.
Sure enough. Have a great day, sir.